Welcome to the Financial Liberty Podcast. Until you wake up from the American dream, financial uncertainty will be your American reality. Join Sam Legaspi and Ko Tsukamoto and their guests as they explore how you can attain financial liberty by uncovering truths that have been kept secret for decades. Have you ever played a game and didn't know the rules? How can you ever win? Learn the rules to the game and in turn, learn how to win. Now, on to the show.
Hello and welcome to the Financial Liberty Project with Sam Legaspi and Ko Tsukamoto. Today we are talking about money, and I'm just going to hand it over to the guys because they are rip-raring ready to go. Sam and Ko's, good morning. How are you?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Doing
great.
Being in the financial game for over 2 decades, I liken myself to a scientist, in a lab that, I've tested and experimented, in so many things and things that worked and things that didn't work. The experiment of financial success is an ongoing one that'll probably never really get solved. But I will say that through these many years of seeing what works versus what doesn't, I figured that there are many commonalities that separate the successful retiree from the non-successful retiree. Success isn't measured by how much money you have, but the quality of life you live and the legacy you're able to leave not only to your kids, but to your grandkids and future generations as well. So today, I've got my trusty right-hand man, Ko Tsukamoto, to help me discuss the topic for today, which happens to be the 10 biggest mistakes people make with their money. How are you, Koz?
I'm doing great here, just watching the weather come down in the form of precipitation. And you know what? Out here in the West, got to have that water. It's good for the economy. It's good for the soul. So I'm happy for that.
Yeah, it's kind of like chicken soup for the soul is water.
Yeah. So we got the 10 biggest, you said, mistakes that people make, eh?
Yeah.
Speaking like I'm from Canada today, eh?
Yeah. That should be me since I got a bunch of hockey players, but So, because the world constantly leaves these clues for us to find and decipher. And oftentimes these clues will often be the keys to getting all the things in life that we've ever wanted. But sometimes we just don't see the clues, nor do we choose to see the clues. And the one thing I learned is, I make a lot of mistakes and I learn from them, of course, but I'd rather learn from other people's mistakes. Wouldn't you?
Absolutely. It's kind of an interesting thought because, money in a lot of places is a taboo subject. People will talk about money, but they won't talk often honestly about money. A typical example, right, Sam, is you go to the water cooler at work, right? Everyone there will brag about how much money they've made in their retirement assets or investments that they have. But when they have that bad day where they lose a lot, mum's the word. They won't appear at the water cooler. So I kind of liken this show to, it's like the tabloid on money, right? You hear the things that people don't want to talk about, like what they didn't do right. And there's a lot of lessons learned here through this show. So listeners, kind of think of this as the tabloid of money.
The tabloid of money, then the Inquirer of money. And, the reality is that we've only outlined 10, but I can tell you, for being around for so long and Ko's for me over 2 decades and for us combined close to, 3 decades, a little over 3, I got to tell you, we could probably create a list of 50 things that.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that list just keeps growing by the week.
And it was hard. It was really hard to actually create just 10 because I know we have limited time and I wanted to go ahead and compress everything into this workshop or to this podcast. And with no further ado, because our time is limited, I figured we'd try to get through the 10 because I'll tell you, if people know who you and I are, we're going to elaborate on each and every single one of these. We're just not going to go ahead and define it and say it and define it and move on to the next one. We're actually going to talk a little bit about it. So with no further ado, let's go ahead and start with number 1. And I think this is a big one, Coz. Not saving enough money. That seems to be one of the biggest things is that people, when they make that mistake, when they look back and they're 5-10 years down the road, they're well into retirement, they wish they probably stocked away a lot more money. And what I like to say about that is sometimes, we run into people that say, I wish I had $500,000 or, I got to get up to 600,000 or 750,000. And you and I, we always say that the end game being the amount of money you accumulate is a very important part to the equation, but it's not one of the most important parts, albeit very important. What's really important is what type of monthly cash flow do you need? Because once you figure out your monthly cash flow, then you can reverse engineer and figure out at what rate of return do you need to generate off of a certain amount to generate that monthly cash flow. So oftentimes we'll see people and we'll talk to them and we'll ask them the question, so what would you do different? And a lot of times, number one, we have them say, well, I wish I saved a lot more money, because we run into people that are in their mid 50s or in their early 60s. And to be quite frank, they're really behind the curve.
It's a formation of habits. We brush our teeth every day. We hated having to do that when we were kids, but our parents, they told us that's what we just have to do. There's no arguments. There's no negotiations. You just do it. And if you don't, then you get to go to the dentist and get a needle put in your gums. Well, that's how life is. And that's how saving money is. If you don't create that habit of putting money away at a young age, you're going to have that needle in your gums. It's going to be in your wallet instead. It's going to be a lot more painful.
That's a really painful visual. A needle in my gums. I remember that. That really stung. The needle in the gum trick.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, I had to learn that lesson more than one time. But, Sam, we just met a husband and wife a few days ago that, they're one of the success stories. Very, they're rare, but, they weren't making a tremendous amount of income. They have a respectable occupation, and they've done very, very well. They're, mid 40s to mid 50s, depending on the spouse that you're talking about, but they've done a very good job of just putting money away. And so he made decisions like, if he had to buy a tile saw, he wouldn't buy the high end one. He would buy one from a different store that he knew wasn't as high in quality, but only using the tile saw once or twice a year. He just, he thought about what was the appropriate amount to spend on something. And he did a bunch of tile work on his home, saved on labor. And he multiplied that sort of habit so many times, and that allowed him to save money on an ongoing basis from his 20s. And it was the same philosophy that his wife held. And so today, they're just a very successful couple, and they can withstand any storm that's coming their way.
Well, there's no question that being frugal is very, very, very important. And in speaking about that couple, I think I know who you're speaking of. If I'm not mistaken, one of them, I think it was the wife, kept a budget and was very religious about that budget. It was a monthly budget. It was a zero budget that they had. If I'm not mistaken, they started that budget when they got married 20 some odd years ago, 29 years ago, I think it was. And it's very important because it showed me immediately that they are financially interested. They're invested in their financial future because they wanted to know where each and every single penny and nickel went. And those type of individuals are, in this economy, in this society, are pretty rare, sadly enough, because a lot of times, what we're given a lecture or a workshop, and we ask people who have a monthly budget in here by a show of hands, and very rarely do we actually see any hands go up. And so it was really nice to see that, because that told us right there at that particular moment that, it's not necessarily going to be an uphill climb for us to help these individuals reach whatever they wanted to go ahead and reach. And
they cared. They genuinely cared about their hard-earned money. You can just see that. They're good stewards. They have a good relationship with money, and it all began with savings. And so, this message falls on a lot of deaf ears. We can tell people until they're blue in the face that they need to save money, and they're just not going to do it because they don't care. These people, in contrast, had a lot of care for not just their money, but their family and where it was going to lead them. And that was, again, almost 30 years ago that they made that decision.
Right.
So, anyway.
So let's move on. So after number one, not saving enough money, and these individuals wish they did save a lot more money, people in general, I should say. Number two is one of the other biggest mistakes that people make is that they don't get out of debt soon enough. And I get it. A lot of people get into debt as soon as they get married. They buy a home with one another. They have a car. They have two cars, and they got to furnish a home. So they run up debt, and they got kids. And to be quite honest with you, how society works nowadays, it's sort of the norm to have debt. But what we've taught to individuals is that having debt is not a good thing. And we get a lot of individuals from time to time disagree with us and say debt is necessary and you got to keep debt going. Leverage is good, borrow other people's money. But when it comes to retirement, you don't necessarily want to have to work for another company. And what I mean by that is I was in a conversation not long ago, and this person who worked for the aerospace industry was asked, hey, where do you work? And he also said, well, he said, I not only work for the aerospace industry, but I work for Walmart. I work for Target. I work for Chevron Mobile. And we were all clueless, like, what in the world? I mean, you work for so many places? And he said, well, no, not really. It's just that I work to go ahead and pay off those cards. So essentially, he said that he was working for those places because he had to pay the credit card debt that he amassed over a period of time. And so, oftentimes, because we see people and they make that big mistake, and it's really difficult to be thinking about retirement if you've got about 100, 150 or 200 or even $50,000 in accumulated debt.
That's a really interesting story, Sam, because if you think about it, another way to view that is, out of a 40-hour work week, how many hours would you like to work so that it's for yourself? So you already know a big part of the week is working for the IRS and working for the state that taxes you. And so let's just say a third of your week goes to that or more. And now you're also paying sales tax, and you're paying other taxes. Like in California, every time you have to get gas, you're having to pay for additional taxes that's worse than other states. And so now you go into debt, as you were talking about. Now you're working for, all the gas companies. You're working for the credit card companies. You're working for the department stores because you've got 15 credit cards. And so how many hours are you left working for literally yourself and your family? Is it, I wouldn't be surprised if there's a lot of Americans that are literally working maybe 1 to 5 hours a week.
Yeah.
Probably would not be
Maybe
much
not
of a
even
stretch.
that. I'll tell you, because the average American actually spends more than what they make.
Yeah.
So they're probably working for all these companies, and they're working for their kids, college, high school, but also their insurance, their phone. They're working for, like AT&T, Verizon. They're working for General Motors, Ally. They're working for every Ralph's.
Right.
That's just how it is.
It's insidious, ladies and gentlemen, because again, it's a habit. It's a bad habit. We're led to believe that it's perfectly the norm to be in debt. We can't get a car that we like. We just go ahead and borrow. We can fog a mirror. We got a little bit of income. We can qualify for a loan. And so guess what? It takes you 5 years to pay off that car. And then after the 5 years, what? You want to go buy another car. So you repeat the cycle. So if you're paying $500 a month to sustain your car habit, can you imagine how much you would have in retirement after 30, 40 years if you put $500 away into retirement instead of a car all the time? So you just need to buy a car cash. If it means that you have to buy something secondhand used, that's fine. There's good cars out there and you get a much better deal. Yeah, we can talk about debt until we're blue in the face and kicking ourselves off our own radio show because we're out of time. But let's move on, Sam.
Yeah. I mean, that could be a podcast for future. As a matter of fact, it's going to be another podcast dedicated completely to debt and why you got to stay away from it. So going back to number 3 of the 10 biggest mistakes people make with money is that, here's one thing. This is interesting, Coz, and thinking about this is people leaving the workforce too early. We know a lot of people, they have a severance or they're being given an opportunity to leave the company through a buyout of some sort. And what ends up happening is they actually look at that as retirement, and they're looking at that as an opportunity to just say goodbye to the workforce. And you know what? They're only like 50, 51 years old. They still have a mortgage. They still have children that they've got to take care of and put them through school. They've got credit card debt. They've got automobile loans. But then yet, for some reason or another, they feel that they've gotten the green light to say goodbye to the workforce. And oftentimes we'll see this. And, these individuals, they utilize the word retirement in a manner which probably shouldn't be all that appropriate because they really aren't retired. They've just been given an opportunity to take some money that was given to them by the company or their retirement that they put away for themselves in the form of 401k. And they're given an opportunity to find another position to earn money. But oftentimes what we see is that we see people saying goodbye to the workforce, and it really shouldn't necessarily be the case because after, again, about 10 or 15 years, oftentimes you'll hear people say, I shouldn't have left.
Well, sometimes people are forced to leave. Whether that's the case or not, the numbers tell you what you have to do. So if you don't have enough in retirement to justify not working, then, it's pretty simple. Then you have to find another job or start a business, anything to create income until you get your numbers to a point where you are satisfactorily wealthy enough to let go of an income producing, activity called a job or a business. Now we've had, Sam, we've talked to people and we've seen what they've done is some of them have acknowledged that they need to work. but they will wait like 2 years to go look for a job because they feel like they're sitting on top of an ATM machine in the form of a pension that they receive from the company that asked them to leave, and they'll go spend that down. So I guess that's a different issue, but you're right, absolutely right. You've got to know your timing. You've got to know your number, and you've got to know whether that number justifies the timing that you're emotionally thinking that you want to take as early retirement.
And another thing that came up is, and it's been recently, is that we've been encountering some people that have been told that their services are no longer needed at the company. And a lot of individuals are very, very upset with regards to that decision, even though financially they're in a position to leave that company. And oftentimes, right, because we see people that are well into their 70s and they're still working, and that's great. That's actually awesome. But what's really interesting about all this is that, ever since we were young, there's this human behavior that we have to feel relevant in the workforce. And I was thinking about this because we were in a meeting this past week, and we were talking to a person, and it was very clear that they were in a position where life was going to treat them very well for the remaining 1/3 of their life if they just make the right choices and do the right things and take that path of being diligent. However, they were really upset with what was transpiring. And a lot of it's because, like you said about, 5 minutes ago, is that there are habits. We wake up and we have a habit of going to work, and these habits all of a sudden get taken away. But also there's another habit, that habit of relevance. We all want to remain relevant. And it's kind of like that movie, Shawshank Redemption. It's a prison movie. And I think it was Morgan Freeman.
Great movie. Yeah.
Yeah. He was the lead character named Red. And he made a statement that referred to leaving the prison, an individual leaving the prison versus staying inside the prison. And he said that, a person leaving the prison is just, a nobody, on the outside.
So he had served his time and he was eligible to leave, and he didn't know if he would be comfortable leaving because he didn't know what to do.
Right.
He's out of his element.
And he's out of his element, and he defined that as outside. On the outside, he's really a nobody, but on the inside, he was relevant. He was a very important man. And so individuals, they are a lot of times, they have restraint in leaving a company, and it's so difficult for them to retire a lot of times because on the inside, they're relevant. They've spent 25, 30 years in that position. People look up to them for answers on certain things. To a degree, they are a leader. They are a mentor to others. And it's something that, again, we all strive for in human lives, or in human nature, is looking for relevance. So it's pretty interesting. I just thought I'd go ahead and throw that off. I know it's a little bit off the topic, but so that's number three. Moving on to number four of our 10 biggest mistakes that people make with money here's a pretty obvious one, but it really isn't obvious, is they don't account for the obvious and the not so obvious in retirement. Meaning that a lot of people, when they say they need $5,000 to live off of, they don't understand that $5,000 net is really about $700 or $7,500 gross. So they don't account for taxes. They don't necessarily account for inflation, and they don't account for medical costs going forward. Because this goes is that the average person, when they're retired, and starting around 70s, they spend anywhere between $200,000 to $250,000 in out-of-pocket medical expenses. So if you don't have that in your portfolio right now, you're going to be mandated to go ahead and spend that at one particular point in your life, and you've got to get that going on. So a lot of people don't account for the obvious things that will be coming their way in retirement.
That's a reality check, but you're absolutely right. And here's another thought that might be kind of an extension of that is, so let's say you have a retirement plan, and that plan was produced during good times, meaning the market's going up and up and up, and you think you can withdraw a certain amount every month. And then the economy changes, the market changes, and now you're going through a recession. The plan doesn't justify that you necessarily maintain the same pace of withdrawals. You may have to scale back. You may have to go into your budget and figure out where to cut some costs because times aren't so good. And so, there needs to be a sense of reality. And it's a little bit disappointing to see sometimes people kind of like hang on to their emotional, their dreams of living a certain lifestyle no matter what happens. But the reality can be different, and you just have to be realistic.
And it's okay to have that particular lifestyle if you plan for it. And that's the other part too, is that a lot of times what goes on is that we'll get individuals speaking to us going, hey, you know what, Coach, can I have a meeting? He's like, all right, great. And you say, well, hey, so tell me a little about yourself. And he says, well, the guy tells you, well, yeah, I'm going to be leaving my company after about 35 years. Oh, really? When are you going to do that? Because I'm doing that tomorrow. It's like, okay.
Or I've already done it.
It's like, what are you going to do, right? What are you going to do? It's going to be really difficult to really plan for something of that nature when he's only giving you 24 hours to plan the rest of his life. That's tough.
Yeah, longest vacation in the world is called retirement. And a lot of people get kicked off the cruise ship far too early because of poor planning or lack of thereof.
Yeah, and sometimes they don't necessarily get kicked off. They actually take themselves off. They just don't know it.
Yeah, they take a big swan dive off the edge of that boat.
Yeah.
And it's not funny, but it happens far too often.
No,
sadly.
It's just planning. That's all it is. It's just planning. And when you move on to number 5 of our topic today, people wish they didn't spend crazily after their decision to retire. That's a big one because we know a lot of people, friends, we know colleagues, we know a lot of individuals that would really like their 10 years back because they're thinking, shoot, I got that money 10 years ago and I really shouldn't have taken my entire family to Europe. And when they're talking about their entire family, they're talking about their 3 kids plus their spouses and their grandchildren. And they wish they didn't spend that $25,000 or $30,000 to take off, knowing that they only had about $400,000 to begin with. And remember, because with number 4, they pull out $30,000. That meant they really had to pull out
right.
What?
And again, it's right, and it's a function again of what your number is. So if you're sitting on $100 million, paying for a trip to Europe for the whole family, and it costing $50,000 is not a big deal. But if you're not in that category, and let's say you only have $1 million, doing that you may want to raise your eyebrow, really question if that's the right decision. So again, it's a function of what your number is. And when I say number, I'm talking about your retirement nest egg.
Right. Your retirement nest egg. And we talk about this. One of the 7 rules to financial success, financial liberty, is knowing your number. And if you need $50,000 or $60,000 a year to live off of, and that equates to $5,000 a month before taxes, then you got to figure out what amount of money do you need to have in the account at what interest rate or what rate of return that will generate that amount of income for you. And it would be sustainable. It needs to be sustainable. In other words, you can't say, well, I just need my $100,000 and I need $60,000 every year and I have $100,000 saved. I need a 60% rate of return every single year in order for me to maintain my lifestyle. That's just not going to work. So it's got to be a sustainable rate and a sustainable type of income. So that seems to be, because we see it a lot of times, is that it's the lottery effect. A lot of times is that people retire and they have in their hands probably the largest check that they will ever receive in their entire life. And as we know, the lottery effect, typically within 2 or 3 years, people win the lottery, they end up losing it all. And what we find a lot is that when people retire, they always want to have that one thing that they always wished they had. And we've seen it. We've seen people take lavish cruises, lavish travels, that bought his and her BMW and Mercedes Benzes, and they wish they didn't do that 10 years down the road.
Yeah, and that's nothing like buying expensive depreciable assets that require maintenance. But hey, that's just me.
I just wish we went back to the society of riding bikes.
Walk 20 miles to work through the snow. Snow and rain. All right. So what's the next one, Sam?
All right. Drawing Social Security. And, a lot of times is that sometimes we'll draw Social Security or people will draw Social Security, but there's some rules that they need to know. And again, we talked to a lot of people and they say, I wish I knew those rules, man.
That's what I love about government, Sam. They got so many rules, and I think rules are set up so that we can trip on them and then get penalized, right? Isn't that how the government makes money? Hey, I'm not trying to be a skeptic here or anything or negative. It's just reality. And so we got to learn how to play the game of money. We got rules. We got to be on top of them. So that's why you're listening to us. Anyway, Social Security, right? So what are some of the mistakes that people make? Well, I would say majority of the mistakes are just not knowing when to take it. A lot of people don't realize that understanding you can take it at the earliest age of 62, it's going to be a discounted amount. Let's just say about 25 to 30%, depending on your own circumstances. But by delaying it, let's say until the full retirement age, which is typically between 66 and 67, depending on your birth year, you could, in a sense, guarantee, I hate using the word guarantee because that can get people in trouble, but the government says you can increase your benefits 6% a year by delaying it until full retirement age, which again is between 66 and 67. Furthermore, if you deferred even longer to the age of 70, which is the longest you can go, 70 is the longest you can go from full retirement age until the age of 70, it goes up about 8% a year. So where else can you get, quote unquote guaranteed returns from the government between 6 and 8%? So knowing when to take Social Security is really something to be thinking about and planning for. The question we get is, well, when should I take it, Coase? And the answer is, well, when do you think you're going to die? And we get that funny expression, right? Like, I don't know when I'm going to die. Well,
we get people cracking up where they actually look at us seriously. Like, did you just really ask me that question?
That's true, but it's funny getting reactions from people, right?
Yeah.
So,
Why don't you explain to them, like, also, Coase, is that a lot of people, they'll retire at 62, they'll take Social Security, but they're under the impression that they can make as much money as they want and earn income.
Well, yeah, there's limitations on how much you can make an income and still, continue taking your benefits. So once you're past the age of full retirement age, which again, depending on your birth year, can be anywhere from 66 to 67 years. Once you're past that point, then you can work to your heart's content and not lose any benefits. But if you're deciding to work beyond a certain amount before that age, then you're going to have some benefits taken away. It doesn't really get lost because it gets prorated once you get to full retirement age, but you won't be getting as much in benefits as you would if you weren't working. So
right, they basically deduct $1 for your benefits for every $2 that you earn above the amount of $17,640 in earned income.
Right. So again, these rules, you just got to be on top of it.
Right. Well, just like a lot of other things, Coase, got to be on top of so many things when it comes to money. And number 7.
That gets hard to do.
Huh?
That gets hard to do on your own. So you need to have, an expert, along your side to help you.
Well, either you hire one or you become one. Knowing what I know now, I probably would never try to manage my own money if I didn't know what I knew. So we're going to move on
to be out golfing.
Yeah. All right. So for the third time, we're going to go on to number 7 here. And we're going to finally get into the performance category of our topic. And a lot of times we see this, and they have too much money in one particular stock. And a lot of times it's their company stock. And, the one thing I want to make sure I mention to people is you take a look at companies like AT&T, for instance. AT&T was down over 20% last year in 2018, the entire amount. But you look at the stock market, the S&P 500, it was down a little over 6%. But then yet AT&T was down 20%. And then you look at other companies such as PG&E, Pacific Gas and Electric, they were down 40%. General Electric was down over 55%. The disk drive manufacturer or tech company, Western Digital, was down over 53%. And so even though the general market was down, a reasonable amount, a little greater than 6%, you're taking a look at individual stocks. And if you work for companies like Pacific Gas and Electric or General Electric and AT&T, and all your money, your entire net worth as far as retirement was concerned is tied up in that, you wouldn't be a very happy camper.
That reminds me of an individual we met, Sam. We know him. Of course, we don't mention names, but again, this is another story. This is where the tabloid part of our show comes into play here. But remember that gentleman, again, we don't mention names, that all of his retirement, he worked at AT&T, and every dollar of his retirement in his 401k was invested in AT&T stock. And we asked him about that. It's like, are you sure you want to be, taking that kind of risk? And he's like, I'm all AT&T. I believe in the company, blah, blah, blah. And he just wanted to do his own thing. In fact, a family member of his even worked at a prominent investment banking firm. And, whether he was taking advice from that individual or not, but he just, stubbornly just wanted to keep all his positions in AT&T. And from what we understood, he just recently retired. And we, I'm just wondering, did you take that 30% hit in AT&T stock in your retirement plan? Because you retired right after that happened. So, if let's say he had about $1 million in there, then, you're looking at, $200,000 to $300,000 that he lost.
Yeah,
So,
I know.
yeah.
We kind of giggle from time to time when we see that because we see a train wreck happening, right? People forget about 2008. They forget about what transpired back when Lehman went out of business, when WorldCom, when Enron, all these other companies. The AIG had trouble. The big three automobile companies had trouble. They forget that Citigroup went all the way down sub $2 a share. And so if you had,
Ooh, wow.
you had
And
your
then it went up.
well, yeah, it went
Big
up
time.
big, but if you had your money, your entire nest egg, just set in that one particular company, you're going to be in a lot of trouble, right?
Right. And people always sell. I mean, not always, but a lot of people sell in panic at the bottom.
Right. Oh, yeah. So we all know
Right.
it. The retail companies or the institutions sell to the retail guys, to the average investor at the top, and the average investor sells their positions to the institutional guys at the bottom. And as a result, the institutional guys buy low and sell high. And,
See, the money never goes away. It's still in the system. It just transfers to somebody else who's a better equipped, better planned, more knowledgeable. So it's a game. So the money doesn't go away. It just goes to somebody else.
Yeah. So, all right. So moving on to number 8, because that was number 7. And, this is one, making bad investment decisions. This seems to be a really generic one, but here's the kicker here. Because we all make bad investment decisions. We all do. There's not one individual out there that's made a really good investment decision or has been immune to bad investment decisions. But here's the thing, though. Most people do not know what type of risk they're taking when it comes to their portfolio in retirement. And a lot of times people take a lot more risk than they should be. And it's one of these areas where if they understood some of the metrics that were allowed to be utilized to measure their risk, they would be in a better position to understand where they sat when it came to their portfolio. And when I'm talking about these metrics, and we're going to have a show about this too, Coase, is when I'm talking about standard deviation, I'm talking about the Sharpe ratio, I'm talking about the alpha, the beta, the R squared, and how these pieces of information, when tied together, gives you an indication if your portfolio is optimized for risk and the return. Are you taking way too much risk? Or are you taking way too much risk for the return you're receiving? Because we see, Coase, that so many people, and we've heard this, man, my buddy, he's making 35%.
Oh, yeah. It's the water cooler conversation.
Yeah. They're making 35% on their money. Why is it we're only making 12? And then, of course, you look at their portfolio because they've been so gracious enough to go ahead and provide their portfolio. And we kind of like whisper going, hey, do we tell this guy that he's taken almost 1.5 times greater than the market risk to get that 35%
right?
I mean,
yeah,
ooh, this is pretty bad. But then yet his counterpart is taking about 50% of the market risk, and as a result is generating very good returns, because in retirement you got to be able to manage that risk.
Right. And you said it, you got to have the tools in place in order to be able to assess your risk. And what are those tools? Well, again, it'd be another show, but you mentioned a few: alpha, standard deviation, Sharpe ratio. It's like if you're a cabinet maker, trying to build a cabinet without a measuring tape, you just can't do it. You'll build something, but it ain't going to be standing upright for very long.
That's why I failed at building that thing.
Uh-huh.
Oh, right. Man, I used duct tape.
Or it's like trying to golf without a rangefinder or having any indication of how far you are from the flag.
That's my problem, because I know a rangefinder who knows how many years.
I know. Let's go get one.
Oh, or maybe it's golfing with just a putter the entire round.
The funny thing is I can have a rangefinder and my score's still the same.
Yeah. No, my rangefinder. Hey, dude, what's my yardage, man? Anyways, all right, let's go ahead and move on. We're down to the last 2 here. And the last 2, number 9, I think we're at. Here's what's something really interesting, Coase, is that a lot of people, and I think we kind of touched upon it earlier, is that a lot of people like to hold on to their trophies in retirement. And we know so many individuals, friends, colleagues, customers, whatever it might be, that really enjoy holding on to that big trophy. Sometimes it's a car, sometimes it's
typically a home, a nice home. They've got history. They've put the tile in themselves, and their kids grew up in it. But ladies and gentlemen, reality is, if it's just you and your spouse living in there, and you've got a 3,000 square foot home, and you're spending most of your time trying to keep it clean, vacuuming, mopping, and this and that, maintenance, and it just goes on and on. Plus, you've got possibly a mortgage payment that's still what it was 20 years ago. You're paying $3,000-4,000 a month on it. It's insanity. I mean,
It's insanity. I mean, if you need $8,000 a month, all right, and of the $8,000, 4,000, half of it is in the form of a mortgage, then you got some issues. You got some issues because we liken it to the fact that back in the 70s when people qualified for homes, there wasn't a FICO score per se. So what they basically did is say, hey, let's bring in your paycheck and we can go ahead and qualify you for 1/3 of your net take home pay. So if you made $3,000 a month net take home, which was really good back then, they're going to qualify you for a house that would provide $1,000 a month in a mortgage payment. And so roughly and safely, you could pretty much say that about 30% of your take-home pay should be in the form of a mortgage. And a lot of times you'll see individuals, they are spending their take-home check or their distributions from their retirement account, and a half, if not more than half of it, a lot of times goes straight into the mortgage. And that's just not a very good solution or a very good formula.
And again, as I said earlier in the show, if you have the numbers that can justify having that big old home, even though it's just you and your spouse living in there in this big old mansion, that's fine as long as your numbers can justify it. But a large majority of Americans are not in that boat. So, it's, you got to figure out what does make sense to hang on to in terms of a trophy. The trophy that I keep, Sam, is the one that I won in martial arts.
I remember that one.
It's free. I didn't have to pay for it. It just collects dust. But, everyone likes to brag a little bit, right? Well, I like to brag about winning this tournament when I was in martial arts.
Was that the picture that there's 10 kids and I was like, now which one's you? Because I couldn't tell.
What do you mean? Why? Because we all had dorky looking haircuts. This is back in the late 60s, early 70s. Boy, did I have
we all look like
interesting
Spock.
haircut.
You guys all look like Spock.
Well, for me, it was the hippie generation, right? And I was the one kid that had Disneyland Marine haircut. I mean, it was really bad. I had to go to, I remember this girl rubbing her hand on the back of my head because she wanted to know what it felt like. Kid you not. You heard it on this show. That was my childhood.
Wow. I wish I had one of those stories. All right. So, number 10 of the 10 biggest mistakes people make with their money. And this is a big one. Ladies and gentlemen, if I had a drum roll, I would go ahead and rub it. Rub the back of my head with it. There you go. And it is making family decisions that eat into your nest egg way too much. In other words, giving money away to your family to a tune where it destroys your nest egg.
That should be number one.
I was thinking about that, but I wanted to go ahead and end on a good note.
We're speechless on that one.
Well, because we got an entire story. I mean, we have an entire 30, 40 minute. We got like maybe 3 episodes here because we probably have about 100 people that we could speak of. And a lot of times, right, because this is really sad. We speak to people and we have great relationships with them and we've known them for so many years and then they wither away and they're unfortunately in a position where they've lost all their money, not to the market, not to, gambling or too many lavish cruises, but, somehow they've got a wedding.
Decide to have the wrong kind of kids. They gave birth to the wrong kind of kids, right?
Well, yeah, and there's a story behind that one too. But no, I mean it really is. You look at it, and there's a $50,000 wedding that they've got to pay for. There's a $30,000 quinceañera. There's a story behind that, right?
Story. You went to the hockey rink recently, right? And some dude was wearing a wedding ring.
Oh, yeah. So, okay. Yeah. All right. You wanted me to go there. I thought, okay, I got to be really careful. But yeah, okay. I was at the hockey rink and there's a guy there I know. And I go, hey, dude, you're wearing your wedding ring on the wrong finger because he had it on his right finger. And he goes, well, because I married the wrong woman. I was like, okay.
Okay. So half the people listening right now are getting mad at us because we're clowning on this guy, right? But it happens the other way too. Okay. So
yeah,
I've heard, in fact, I hear more jokes like that from the other
side, right?
Oh, it's hilarious.
All right. Well, go team, man. And so here's the thing. We're going to end off here. And number 10 oftentimes should be number 1. And in no particular order is this really, from worst to best or best to worst or worst to worstest. But basically, we've seen individuals make significantly bad decisions when it comes to their family and giving their money to their family to a point where it decimates their retirement. And it's something that people got to watch out for. And I will tell you, there's 10 items here. And that could mean potentially that you've got to stay tuned because we're going to identify and go over each item in each and one of our podcasts. We could combine them or we can just talk about one. But I can tell you, right, Coz, is that there's 10 podcasts here. There's 10 shows here because it's so important, if not more.
Talk about tabloid. That'd be the one. But I
What,
mean,
the wrong ring one?
just relationships are always interesting. So your spouse has everything to do with how successful your retirement's going to be, how happy your life is going to be, obviously, right? Or how unhappy things can be. But, Sam, you and I, we've been through a lot of challenges in that side of things. And so I think we're qualified and we're eligible to talk about it. But here's the thing. If you're not equally yoked in all the possible manners, whether it's spiritual, financial, values, children, child rearing, family, there's everything. If you're not equally yoked, it's going to be hard. And finances are one of the most important things where you have to be equally yoked. And, if you have a partner who just doesn't want to play ball or cooperate or listen, it's problematic. And, I realize, when we choose our mates, we think everything's rosy, we think everything's fine. And then, 10, 20, 30 years down the road, we find out it's not. But there's a cost that goes with that. And it's, I would say, destructive to a retirement, because you got attorneys that are very happy to take the case, and they'll take a retainer and then they'll start charging you over and over. And pretty soon you're $50,000, $100,000, $1 million into legal fees just to get away from this spouse that you no longer get along with. Now, we can't control the kids that we have, but that's a whole nother problem, right? There's a lot of guilt trips going on. Guilt destroys retirements. And we see people doing things for their kids that they have no business trying to afford doing. And yet it happens because, I don't know, maybe it's peer pressure, maybe it's trying to keep up with the Joneses, and or just feeling guilt that, you screwed up as a parent when they were kids, and then you're trying to make up for it with money now. But anything that leads to a destructive retirement, in the end, what are you going to do? You're going to live on the streets, and that's what's happening. There's such a huge homeless issue. We're hearing about it in LA. I'm not, I haven't researched it. I don't know if these people that are on the streets have failed retirements, but, there's probably a study that needs to be there. But, the thing is, what are you going to do when you run out of your last dollar and you're still in your 60s or 70s or 80s? Where are you going to go live?
Well, I think everyone's going to live with you, Coz.
I do have a few rooms, but
no, you say something really, really, really important. And, we're going to end on that note, because I will tell you, the last note on that note is, we discuss with our kids on a regular basis. Times are a little bit different, is that young adults are meeting nowadays, and they're meeting at places. They're looking to get married. And unlike yours and my generation, Coz, where we didn't have debt when we got married. You and I didn't have debt. Your significant other didn't have debt. Your wife-to-be didn't have debt. Today, you could graduate, you can meet a person, and before you know it, not only do you have debt, but that person has debt to the tune of about $500,000 combined. And both of you got a mortgage payment, and you guys are just in your middle 20s. So it's a different story, and it actually is a different podcast. So we're going to go ahead and top it off here. And you're listening to Sam and Coz, and on the the Financial Liberty podcast. And once again, thank you very much for allowing us to enter your home and entertain you with financial information.
Ciao.
Well, ciao it is, Coz. I appreciate that. And Sam, both of you guys did fantastic job. This was very informative, a little dark maybe, but truth. Right? That's the bottom line, that this is truth and people need to hear it. So I appreciate that. And I want to thank the audience for listening today. Thank you for listening to the Financial Liberty Project podcast with Sam Legaspi and Coz Tsukamoto. If you have not subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe now button below. This way, when Sam and Coz come out with a new podcast, it'll show up directly on your listening device. This will make it much easier to share these podcasts with your friends and family. And as you were listening to this today, did you picture anybody in your mind that needed to hear any of these 10 items? Maybe they're struggling with or they're doing wrong, and they're certainly not going to want to hear it from you. But share the podcast. Maybe they'll hear the voice of reason with Sam and Coz. Again, thanks for listening today. For everyone at the Financial Liberty Project, this is Eric Johnson reminding you to live your best day every day. And we'll see you next time.
It's that time again where the call of the open road makes its way. We hope good fortune finds you on your own personal road. And until next time, we thank you for listening to the Financial Liberty Podcast. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available.